welcome to A Creative Affair. And you're here today with Len Metcalf, Bree Stockwell, and today's guest is Alister Benn. And we're so excited to have you here, Alister. We've been mates for quite a while now, and I've always loved our conversations. And I'm so excited to take it further with you today, and also to have my wonderful creative affair partner, Bree, with us to also extend this wonderful conversation about creativity. How are you today, mate?
Doing very well, thank you very much. We're time zone juggling at the moment. I think it's early morning for you, afternoon for Bree, and it's late evening for me here in Scotland. But yeah, it's a pleasure to see you again. I mean, it's always great to be here. So thank you for inviting me.
Well, I hardly slept last night and it's still dark out. That's how early it is here in Australia here today. It is bright and early, but I've got my cup of tea and I'm settling down for a wonderful conversation. How are you today, Bree?
I am doing well. I'm caffeinated and it's middle of the day. And I've had lunch and I'm just excited to have this conversation. To be honest, Alister, I've followed you since I was kind of first starting photography. And I love what you preach about creativity and how you can use it to influence your photography or whatever creative work you do. And I just really love talking about that part. And I'm excited to have this discussion with all of us. What did we say we were going to talk about?
Great. Yeah, getting to talk about creativity is pretty much the best thing we get to do. It's a wonderful thing, and even when we're opening our mouths now, we're being creative. We're just forming thoughts and letting them go out there into the world, and it is a creative process. Having us, creating sentences. So yeah, I'm very happy to be here. So yeah, let's do this, as they say.
Well, Alister, would you like to just introduce yourself quickly to our audience? Some people mightn't have come across you before.
Sure. Okay. I'm Alister Benn. I run a company called Expressive Photography. I'm Scottish and live in the far west of Scotland with my Norwegian wife, Anne Christine. Together we run our company. Now, most of that is education focused. So we run workshops. I do mentoring. We have a pretty successful YouTube channel where we make content every week. I run a members forum on our website as well, which is like a subscription model. So pretty much everything we do is geared towards teaching and mentoring creativity. And obviously during COVID, we had to cut. Well, we didn't do any workshops, of course. So we built up the online business. And now that we're back running workshops, we've now got kind of two things running simultaneously. So it's getting kind of busy. But yeah, I mean, I've been shooting since I got back into photography in the early 2000s, predominantly bird photography to start off with, but very quickly realized that I had a real love for the landscape and decided to try to become adept at it. So yeah, I mean, for the last 20 odd years now, I pretty much dedicated all my time to photography, and I turned professional in about 2010. So 13 years ago, mainly by writing ebooks and then running workshops. That was kind of my path into a professional career as a photographer.
Thank you for that. It's always so interesting to hear about different people's paths into their current creative work, because it really is never a straight line. Like Len's journey, starting in, art school, mine is definitely, kind of a real squiggly line too. I mean, I've done multiple creative things. And so it always really is interesting hearing about how people become who they are. And then also, I think this is, I think now is time to dive into our topic today. I think we were saying, talking about the combination of like creativity and business, and what do you do when you get to like a crossroads? And we can talk about all things. We're just going to have a combo of topics today, but I think this is a really interesting thing to start off with. Is what do you do when you get to like a crossroads, or you feel your? Because I feel like I'm at the space when you feel your creative work changing, then what do you do? So maybe you could talk a little bit about that, because I'm sure, Len, you've had this in your life too. Like, what do you do when you feel your work changing and shifting?
I think we shouldn't confuse running a business and being creative as being the same thing, or even things that have to be running concurrently. I think running a business is a business, and it's about providing value to our clients and trying to affect change and positivity in our clients. And whether that's face-to-face or online or through written word or video or whatever, it doesn't matter how we're interfacing with other people, as long as we believe we're adding value. And for that value, we get paid. And that's the business of it. Now, the fact of the matter is that it has nothing to do with creativity. You know, you can creatively come up with ways to market, or you can creatively come up with ways to get content across to your clients. But that's not the same as going out into the landscape with a camera and playing and being inquisitive and allowing that interaction with the world to cleanse you and to teach you something about yourself and your perspectives with the world. So one thing for sure, and if anybody is under the illusion that being a professional photographer is about being outside making photographs all day, every week, that is sadly not the case. I was saying to Len before we started recording, I think up until December, I had more or less 7 or 8 months where I didn't take a single photograph. And rather than stressing about that or fighting it or trying to force myself into the landscape when I didn't really want to go in there with a camera, because I was out there running and I was out there hiking and doing a lot of long distance running through the hills. So I was still out in nature, and I was still engaging, and I was still seeing, and I was still feeling, and I was still being emotionally affected by the landscape, which in its own right is a creative interaction. So the fact that I wasn't making a photograph, the fact that I wasn't making a product or a physical product, there was still work being done in my brain, which was very good work to be done and needed to be done, because the product of our photography needn't be a photograph, ironically. So I waited until I felt motivated to make a product, or saw things that sparked my imagination. And I think the difficulty when you are a professional photographer is that it's very easy to be led by trends or the competitive nature of social media, or other people who are running YouTube channels, or other people who run courses in certain places. It's very easy to be led by that competitive spirit. And I fight it with every fiber in my body, because photography is not competitive. Life shouldn't be competitive. Our relationships with ourselves shouldn't be competitive. So I was quite patient with it. I did lots of other things. I played lots of guitar. I mean, my room is surrounded by guitars. And when I felt creative, I picked up a guitar and I played and I recorded music. And that's how I expressed myself, was through my guitar playing. But when I did get back into the photography side of things, or the creativity side of photography, it was really different. You know, my relationship with my photography now is kind of, it's rejuvenated and it's very positive. And yeah, I think it's too easy to force these things, and it's too easy to try and manipulate what we think we should be doing. I'm much more open to the concept of allowing my creativity to guide me down different avenues and surprise me. I think surprise is one of the most undervalued attributes of creativity. It's when you surprise yourself. I think that's the good feeling. So yeah, I think business is business and creativity is creativity. And if creativity is your business, then best not to try and compromise both. I think allowing the creativity to be itself and then allowing the business to be its business is probably the best thing to do.
It sounds like there that you live a creative life, and you consider, you mentioned running as being a creative act, and your interaction with the landscape as being a creative act, and obviously playing music is a creative act. And it sounds like you live a creative life, and photography is just one of the outlets in there. Would that be correct in saying that?
I agree 100%. And I think this is where some of the definitions that are used to describe things like creativity are very much rooted in one-dimensional attributes. I think creativity is...
It's true, though. You're very right. Each writer does this, doesn't it? They pull it down and go, this is what the creative act is, and they define it incredibly narrowly to suit the way that they see the world.
I find sometimes in order to say you're creative, you have to produce something to look at, or, that there has to be something tangible involved versus living in a way where you feel creative or creativity infuses your life. Whether or not you're actually making or creating doesn't matter, right? It's that state of being in your mind where you don't have to be even making anything to feel that way. I think that's so interesting when people talk about creative burnout, and we don't have to make it into a bad thing. I want to go back to what you said about surprise, because I love that. I love thinking about how I surprise myself. And I just did a presentation for a group, and one of the things I love surprising myself. I'm excited. I'm always excited to surprise myself. It's one of my core thoughts when I go out or when I do anything. I'm excited to surprise myself here. And so one of the things that I've done recently is I have a full spectrum for anyone who, if you know photography, then you might know what this is. But anyway, I have a full spectrum converted camera now with a infrared filter, and that camera, even though it's a tangible thing, I can take that out into the world and go, it's like my play toy. It allows my brain the ability to now play and experiment. And because it deals with light that's not within our regular visual spectrum, when I look through the viewfinder, I'm like, oh, that's a surprise. And so almost every time I look through it, I'm I'm surprised here. This is so fun. It looks so different. And then if I'm with someone, I show someone else and they're surprised too. And it really does it's like a joyous experimentation out there in the world that we can either acquire something or we can change how we think about what we're doing to do that, to surprise ourselves. I love that so much.
Yeah, I agree. Obviously, 100% with that. And the previous thing we were on there was the idea that creativity is more than just creating something, or creative living is more than just a product. And the thing I'm kind of working on the most at the moment is understanding that relationships are really important. So we all have relationships with partners and friends and colleagues and family and clients or work colleagues or people we go to the pub with or people we play sport with. I mean, every single relationship in our life is one of its own little thing, and each of them are really quite different. And we also have relationships with our cameras, and we also have relationships with landscapes, and we also have relationships with our creativity and the output of our creativity. And we also have a relationship with ourselves. And that relationship with ourselves is the key creative relationship, because every one of those relationships that I've discussed, we are at the hub of. We're right at the heart of all of those relationships. And if you affect one of those relationships, then all of the relationships change, because you're changing yourself somehow. If you improve a relationship with a partner, or you improve a relationship with a friend or a work colleague, or you improve the relationship with your camera, then everything can change. So I'm really interested in all of these different relationships. And what I realized is that if I'm out running and feeling strong and I'm making creative decisions on a trail, running along a trail and it's rocky and tree roots and rough or downhill or steep or whatever, you're making thousands of little micro adjustments the whole time. And I feel good about that. And it definitely makes me feel better about myself, and it definitely makes me feel better about everything. So I think a creative life is very much a state of mind and an attitude. And that definitely helps you in terms of your creativity, because when you're creative, you have to believe in it. You can be surprised, but then it's like, okay, well, is this cool enough to show somebody else? Are they going to be surprised? Or is this worth sharing? Because that's all the product is something that we think is worth showing somebody else.
There's an incredible amount of health benefits to creativity, isn't there? That we gain so much of it. And I'm sure this is one of the reasons why all three of us here are so addicted to the creative act, to living a creative life, is that we continue to grow. And as you say, it's a relationship. And like many, you heal one and you heal all the others at the same time, or you change them and shift them or improve them by concentrating on different bits of it. And my relationship to my art and to the creative act is one of growth, and one that has continually changed throughout my life. And I've said this a few different times, but I keep trying to qualify myself when I say that. But creativity seems to be the greatest teacher, or art seems to be my greatest teacher in life. And the reason I qualify it, because I often think nature is the greatest teacher of all. But for me personally, I learn so much more in this stage of my life through making art and interacting with it and talking to it and listening to it and letting it guide me and surprise me and take me on these journeys, that it's become my healing tool. And it makes me who I am today as such a sensitive, interesting, well, this is me talking about myself, but not anyone else can judge me on these things, but that keep me engaged and going in the world, and keep producing and plodding on each day, and not actually plodding on, but getting up and going, right, this is what's going to happen, and I'm going to get out and do some of this stuff and keep going with this, because it is so intrinsically rewarding. And I say this pointedly because I think people early on in their journey really struggle with this, because it's quite a brick wall that they get up against, and they don't feel that it's such a rewarding, growthful thing in those early stages.
I think it's a very intimidating concept. I think it's a hugely intimidating, find your creativity. I think the words creativity and enlightenment should be synonymous.
I love that one.
Striving for enlightenment is the antithesis of enlightenment, and striving for creativity is the antithesis of creativity. You can't strive for enlightenment and you can't strive for creativity. And obviously, Len knows, I lived in Tibet for 7 years, and that kind of stuff rubs off on you. And it's a very strong part of who I am, and it's a very important part of who I am. So, a lot of those philosophies and psychologies are pretty heavily embedded in me. But this is where the parallels lie. We use language. I'm trying to use language with regards to creativity that's not in the general lexicon of creative language, because it comes with baggage. We've been hearing these words and these mantras and these statements for 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 years or more. And people are tired of it. People still don't understand what the people meant with it, or it's become so meaningless as a statement. As if you can find your creativity by following a bunch of rules, for example. It's so oxymoronic. It just doesn't make any sense that, you can be creative by doing this. That's not how it works. And I think the thing that Len was just saying there, which really resonated with me, was when he was talking about the healing nature of creativity and the purpose that it gives his life. And one of the things I really feel about it is that when we create something, it is an externalization of a perspective. That it's a perspective that we have locked in our head that doesn't exist until it manifests itself in some kind of composition or creative artistic statement. And when you do that, the reason it's so powerful to you is that you can see these things out in front of you, either in aesthetic or in a musical arrangement or in in dance or whatever, these externalizations of feelings and emotions. And once you see it in front of you, you suddenly have a different perspective on it. And what it allows, I know where we might mention my book later on, but the whole purpose of that was for me to understand my inner landscape and the diversity of that inner landscape. And the impact it had on my life was incredibly profound, from being medicated for anxiety and depression 6 years ago or 7 years ago to now being pretty balanced. I'm a pretty easygoing guy, but I haven't been on medication for 7 or 8 years now, 6, 7 years. And that is life changing for someone who's lived under a shadow of anxiety. It's a powerful, powerful thing that we can do in our lives. And to wrap it up in mundane language and make it somehow ordinary seems a disservice to anybody who could be doing things better just because they didn't know that they could do things easier or better.
How many people have we met that say that they're not creative, and yet the creative act is universal as a learning language, as a way that we've got to where we are. It's not endemic, but it's a part of who we are, isn't it?
Well, creativity is anti-establishment also. It's the celebration of individualism. And that's not what society wants. Society wants homogeny because it's far easier to manage homogeny than it is to manage a bunch of anarchic creatives. So I personally, I personally think that society wants to homogenize more than it wants us to be free.
It's kind of our tendency, right? Because part of us wants to belong to this community where people think the same way as us, but also that will never exactly happen because we all have such individual perspectives, and it's totally up to us to be able to express those things in a way that that feels authentic to us versus letting that outside world dictate what we should be saying, and we see this all over the world. But I love this discussion because this is making me think about even my own part of it, which is my own piece of my own creative journey. And I've grown back to relationships. I've grown in my own personal relationship with myself, in exponential growth, just by doing my own this creative work. But it's interesting, and I find it also difficult to put it into language because I'm A, not as eloquent with words, but B, it's almost indescribable, the connection between my creative work and who I am continuously becoming and how I am continuously changing as I do more and more and more. And I've discovered so much about myself, what I'm capable of, emotionally, expanding my my view of the world and other people and my relationships to all of that. And it's been very fascinating. And I have really struggled to put those into some kind of language, which is maybe why when I look at my own photographs or when I look at what I have created, I put a lot more meaning into it because of that relationship and change and growth. And maybe that's why we are so tied to what we create. It becomes just a piece of us. And so once we put it out into the world, though, it's a little difficult to separate ourselves sometimes. But I truly have grown in my personal relationship with myself, and that in turn has affected all the rest of everything else I do.
I find it ironic that we're talking about this in a podcast full of words and as visual creatives. And I think that we've actually done that on purpose as a way of separating out the art and not getting confused so we can work on the words. Because sorting out the language and understanding it intellectually is part of the journey, isn't it? We have to figure out how to do it physically and emotionally, but then part of us, by explaining it, exploring it, talking about it to others, we actually solve it and make it more clearer for ourselves in our own mind, so that as we unpack it and talk about it and find words for it and challenge those words and ideas, it actually becomes easier because we have it much, much clearer in our mind as to what we're doing. And it's been a benefit, and all three of us understand this as a teacher, by taking a creative act and then trying to encourage other people to do it and be involved and to engage in it. Our personal improvement in this process just skyrockets because we're in this intellectual understanding of what's going on and trying to get our heads around it. I find that fascinating.
I think that's particularly true, that I spend a huge amount of my time thinking about, this is going to sound horribly egocentric, I spend a lot of time thinking about myself, but only from a work in progress perspective, just like, why did I point my camera at that? What was it about that thing that made me want to point my camera at it instead of something that was 10 feet to the left of it? Now, that question led me down an incredible rabbit hole of not just discovering the landscape in a completely different way, but discovering my relationship with the landscape in a different way. And I want to skip back a few heartbeats, because one of the things Bree said there was the importance of us expressing ourselves creatively and people seeking for their creativity. And I think it's really important for us to attest to the fact that social media is very negative for people who are striving to find their creativity or trying to express themselves creatively. Because as soon as you bring popularity into the equation, you're starting to instantly compare yourself with other people who are more popular. And that is poison for creativity. That is cancer for creativity. Nothing good will come of that. And I think this is the biggest struggle that we as educators have, is to help anybody who we're in contact with through our influence or circles of influence to just say, well, is the popularity important? But this is it. And Bree said, we're part of a society. We're part of a big peer group. We're part of a big organism that's many, many, many tens of or hundreds of thousands of people all going out making photographs. And it can be very, very difficult to say, this is me, when it looks nothing like anybody else's photographs. If you're out there doing something completely wild and completely new and completely different, there's that fear, there's that peer pressure to fit in with the group. And that's something we all experience throughout our lives. We come out of our mothers fresh and clean and ready to take on the world with these incredible little personalities wrapped up in a very juvenile form. We get sent off to kindergarten, and then you go to school, and then all of a sudden you realize that you can't just do what you want. You've got to follow all these rules and fit into society and fit in with the class. And that just progresses through our lives. So at every step of the way, our creativity is being chiseled away from us. And what is left is a very functional veneer in most cases of, this is the person who is going to walk through this world with the least resistance, that's going to be able to fit in various places. And being a wacky creative is not the easiest path. So I think it's a very difficult thing that as we become conditioned to compromise our creativity, and this is why most people are searching for their creativity, because they lost it probably 30 or 40 years ago when they were told that they have to draw within the lines, or you can't have a pink sky, or you can't have a green sister, or whatever it may be. So I just think one of the key components, it's like that Monty Python movie. What have the Romans ever done for us? What's creativity done for us? Well, surprise is one, and playfulness is another, and the list will continue.
Very much so. And social media really creates mediocrity, doesn't it? And we end up aggregating likes, and the whole algorithms just promote a mediocre work, and you're totally right that the really, really interesting work doesn't surface on there.
And Len knows I actually really love social media. But I have in one of my workshops, I teach actually not just about social media, but our relationships with other people. And it's, I think initially social media feels that way. We've got all our likes and it feels homogenous. There's comparison. And for sure, I think that's a generally correct statement. But I also think if we can switch our mindsets to, or how we think about what we're seeing and how we're interacting with people, like I have totally shifted how I think about it. I use social media to put out my own work and express myself, but also I use it to build relationships with other people and find work that's really inspiring. Like I love saving things in collections and going on and, collections that I have and find ways to get inspired. And I've had some wonderful conversations with people. So I don't necessarily think that social media is all bad, but back to what you were saying, Alister, it's the comparison part. Like, when we are telling ourselves that either two things, either my work isn't good enough or I'm better than someone else, both of those things, I think you're right. That is poison for our own work because all of a sudden we're introducing someone else's work into our own creative work. And we don't need that to really be making the authentic work that means a lot to us. And so I think that's why a lot of people decide that they don't want to look at other people's stuff because they are in the habit of comparing themselves in, either way. And if we can somehow separate ourselves, and this can take a lot of work, but it's so worthwhile to me now to have done that work for myself because I can go online now and go, I love their work. And also I'm doing my work here. And I don't really care what someone else is doing. Like, I don't care if I put out something that looks really odd now. It doesn't matter to me because the likes are just numbers, and so that to me is like the space that I want to be in, where I want to be able to create the authentic work that I want to. And I love that we're all telling you, the audience, to go find out how you can create the authentic work that means a lot to you. What is your creative intuition telling you to do? Not the influence not being influenced by other people and all this other stuff that our society is telling you to be influenced by.
I want to ask Alister a question right now about what Bree's just talking about, and that's about how do you listen to your intuition and what does that actually look like to you, Alister? Because you're our guest and I'm really fascinated by this journey of discovering ourselves and our art. And I know you believe in this, and I'm interested in the practical side and of what does it actually feel like listening to yourself?
I think that's a really curious question. Intuition's a word that, again, I think this is one of the issues, is that some words come with baggage, and intuition is one of the words that really comes with baggage. What really is intuition? Is it a set of learned things that have just become subconscious? In which case, our intuition might lead us down very predictable routes, composing things in a somewhat formulaic way. You could say you do it intuitively, and it's just because you don't have to think about it anymore. So I think intuition is very different from unlearned or spontaneous creativity. I think they're very, very different things. I think I can go into the landscape, and just because I've been doing it for 20 plus years, I can go and find something that will make an okay photo, without too much difficulty. And that's not an arrogant kind of, hey, I'm such a great photographer. It's just, you give a musician a guitar and they're going to pick it up and play it, even if they haven't played that guitar before. So I would say that 80% or more of my intuitive creativity comes when I'm not actually with a camera in my hand. I think it comes when I'm doing something else. It's an idea or a concept or a phrase. There's little phrases come into my mind, for example, when I'm running, a metaphor for something that I'm feeling, and I'll find a phrase, and that somehow becomes like a bedrock. So it's like out of darkness, for example, was a phrase that came to my mind about 5 years ago, when I realized that I was emerging out of this really heavy period of my life. And that became a concept, and that became ways for me to start joining dots between invisible points. And I think that is more my kind of understanding of what my intuitive relationship with creativity is. It's creating something out of thin air that is very new, and whether that's just new to me or, I haven't seen every photograph in every world in the world made by every photographer. So there may be other people out there doing the same thing, but I haven't seen it. So I just think it's really important to listen to those little spill words that come into your brain. A little phrase, or it's like when you're a musician, a little melody might come into your head, and that becomes a seed, which can become a symphony. So I just think that I go out and make photos now most weeks. I was out a couple of days this week making images for videos for YouTube. And I knew when I was looking to make a photograph, because I was there and it was like, okay, I've got to find something to make a video about. And then there was other photographs. It was just like, wow, that's really cool. And, finding something in a landscape, especially in anonymous landscapes or landscapes that aren't like popular places to go. When you find something that just really excites you and captures your imagination, and you're glued to the viewfinder and you're just looking through it, just wowing yourself with just this really cool combination of elements. I think that's the kind of little moments that I, if I was having an out-of-body experience, I would look down on that and say, yeah, that's optimal. That's the kind of optimal experience of just being in a landscape, really feeling it, really just being there, not thinking about anything else. And I think if you're thinking about anything else when you're out, you're not there. So I really try not to be thinking about, world news or all the horror things that are going on all over the place, or, anything that's on my mind. I try to not think. Instead of mindfulness, I've developed the concept of mindlessness. And mindlessness is my state of being in the landscape, is mindlessness.
How do these words and little phrases fit into this mindlessness, Alister?
Well, when you're mindful, you are aware of sensations and thoughts, and you try to disassociate yourself with having an effect or receiving an impact from them. When you're mindful and you're walking into the supermarket and someone grabs the trolley from in front of you, and or the cart to go into the supermarket, and you feel yourself getting angry about that, then mindfulness is realizing that the anger is not going to have a positive outcome. Whereas mindlessness is no thought. It's more like an empty mind state. You're not thinking. So when something does come into your mind, it's not the product of conscious thought. It's the product of just spontaneous awakening, as it were. This is sounding kind of zen.
It's harder. It's harder to be distracted when you're in mindlessness, I think, because things don't influence you and bother you, and that's kind of my feeling about it. I was interested when you were talking about intuition. I think it's maybe the word isn't intuition, but what you were describing is a feeling. It's all emotion based, because our emotions are. This is to me what I'm just observing, and I observe this in myself too. That when we're led to do something, we don't have to be thinking about things, but it's an emotion, like you said, wow. And that to me is like a more powerful emotion that causes me to act. And I love being led by whatever emotion comes over me. And if I'm allowing myself the space to create, to be able to just be led by the emotion to wherever it is I need to go. So that's kind of what I'm observing. What do you think about that comparison?
I'm a very emotional person, and I believe that all art is emotional. And I think that there are attributes to emotions that can be married to aesthetics. We understand the emotional resonance of music, the words of a song. How many times have we cried listening to music? And even music without words. If someone can make you cry by playing a piece of music that has no words and they're just using the resonance to affect your emotions, that's incredibly powerful. Now, I believe most people have a fairly healthy relationship with music. They have things they like, they understand, oh, I don't like that. They understand genres and styles. They understand instruments being different. But I believe there's a complete parallel between that and aesthetics. So they work in slightly different ways, but there are attributes of certain aesthetics that are going to make you feel this or make you feel that. And they are just inherently in the landscape. We've all witnessed fog rolling over a landscape, and the diffusion of that and the obscuring of that and the mystery of that and the feel and the luminosity of it and the way it's lit and the movement and the kind of sensual, sinuous aspect of fog. So all of these things have emotional attributes, and they are the things that we resonate with. So intuition for me is a perception of feel. I think feel is significantly more important than see. I do see visual relationships, and I wouldn't say that I find compositions. I would say I see visual relationships, or I feel visual relationships. And those visual relationships have attributes that somehow resonate with a certain emotional spectrum that I'm in. And this is why creativity is such a positive thing for us to have in our lives, because what are the aesthetics of fear? What's the aesthetics of being scared? What are the aesthetics of anger or rage or passion or love or euphoria or calmness or tranquility? And this is the aesthetic spectrum that we have at our disposal. And if you consider the midtones of your histogram to be the fulcrum of your emotion, then where those midtones are placed changes the whole feel of the image. You drag the midtones to the left, the image gets darker, more mysterious. You drag the midtones to the right, and the image gets brighter and more emotionally uplifting. There's a complete emotional spectrum wrapped up in histograms. And these attributes, and this is pretty much what I teach. I mean, this is my lexicon of teaching, is this emotional spectrum and understanding that how we feel when we see something that we create needn't necessarily be the way that someone else will feel when they see it, because we don't know their emotional spectrum. and this is the difficulty of really intentional manipulation of another person's emotions. You could say, I really love this. So let's say I pick up a guitar and just crank it up with tons of distortion and tons of effects and crank out a massive chord. A bunch of kids might really love it because it's angry and aggressive, but my mum is just going to say, that's just noise. I do not like that. So there isn't that kind of guaranteed response. And this is how we end up with trends, and this is how we end up with kind of thematic styles that people tend to make images in, because they're kind of universally agreed upon as being okay. Whereas I just think there's a bigger spectrum than that.
I think all our moms would say it's noise. Right? I'm so curious about this. I have this theory, and I think we've talked about it before, you and I, Len, and I've heard other people mention it, that I think sometimes we create work and we don't quite know what it means to us, if it means anything even, or how it changes us, or what our relationship to it is. I think we've got a lag. Like internally, there's something that we feel emotionally guided to create, and then if there is some sense to be made of it, I think there's always like a time lag, 6 months, a year, 2 years, 5 years, whatever it is, because sometimes I find myself going, why did I make that? And then I know 2 years later, I go, oh, now I'm putting the pieces together. So I'm wondering, Alister, what your experience with this is. That kind of what your book is about? Like, tell us more about this idea, if you agree with this or not.
Yes, I agree with that. I think the problem with creating with a plan in your head, so sitting with a raw file, for example, and having a plan, is you can only take the photograph in the direction that you can imagine. So that's one outcome.
Mm-hmm.
That's one possible outcome. Let's say, just for argument's sake, that there are, let's have a small number, an infinite number of potential outcomes. Okay, so you're basically throwing away infinity minus one of all possible outcomes of an image by having a plan. So I kind of like that idea of spontaneous creativity, and that's where I think you can take images in directions that you surprise yourself with, or perhaps, and that can happen with a camera in your hand as well when you're out in the landscape. If you only go there with a plan of making that image and then you make that image and then leave, then that's all you could ever do, and you've just abandoned an infinite number of other possibilities. Now, I think that when we are in those creative states, then if we end up with an outcome that's kind of puzzling to us, or we don't quite understand it, I have a statement for that, because obviously I've thought about it, which is our subconscious was speaking a language that we're not ready to understand yet, or we don't understand yet. And it takes time for a certain amount of growth to happen, I think, before we can truly understand what we were trying to say or what we were trying to feel. And I think this happens an awful lot of the time. I know that societies and cultures around the world all have different relationships with men and women, and what roles men and women, and that's obviously expanding now into transgender and other communities. But there's a kind of societal expectation. You grow up in Glasgow, you're going to be stoic and you're not going to talk about your feelings. And, if someone looks at your girlfriend, you're going to punch them in the face. And, that this is what's expected of you. And obviously that's a very narrow emotional spectrum. It's basically, don't talk about your feelings, don't show affection, and get angry at any potential threat. And that's pretty brutal, when you're a sensitive, thoughtful person. I think what's important for all people moving forward is that even if you can't say those words, I mean, I know people who can't say, I love you. They just can't. They really, really struggle to say it to anybody. And if you can put that emotion into a photograph and express that emotion in a photograph, then that is a very, very solid step on the road to at least accepting that you can feel those emotions. You might not say them yet, but you're setting off in that right direction. So yeah, I think there's lots of people out there who make images that are confusing to them because they're expressing emotions that they've suppressed or have been repressed, or they've had them beaten out of them in abusive relationships. They've had them beaten out of them by their parents or peers or bullies at school. And expressing those emotions has become taboo to them. So I think many times we can express things through our photographs or our other art, be it poetry or music or anything we want to do creatively, that we aren't ready to listen to yet. and the book is a kind of an evolution of that to a certain extent.
It's really interesting that sensitivity is something that crosses all three of us, isn't it? That it's that we are all sensitive, quite sensitive people, and that's one of the driving forces that pushes us towards creativity as a way of expressing that sensitivity out to the world.
I think it's hugely important.
I've become more sensitive and emotional since really diving into my creative work. There's a huge connection to it, being able to truly express myself, but also put it out into the world and say, this is me. I'm vulnerable. Think whatever you want about it.
The thing about that, Bree, is that when we do that, I remember I watched a bunch of climbing movies. I was a mad climber when I was a kid, and I still really enjoy watching climbing movies. Alex Honnold free soloing El Cap, and Tommy Caldwell, and all these really cool climbers.
Yes,
so I mean,
that's a great film, isn't it?
It's just the madness the madness that all these kids get up to these days. But I remember watching one about a woman who was growing up as a climber, and she was gay, but she didn't know she knew she was gay, but she wasn't prepared to talk about being gay, and she wasn't prepared to be out. And eventually in her late 20s, she did come out because she realized that by doing so, she was a role model for hundreds of thousands of kids around the world who didn't have role models, who they could look up to, people in society doing things. And in a similar way, I think sensitive people who are creatives are taking a stand for all the quiet, sensitive people who were bullied at school, or who had horrible things happen to them in their lives, or suffered very, very difficult periods of their life through either mental health or other illness or whatever. You become a torch, for hundreds of thousands of people around the world who suffer these things quietly and stoically. And I think it's really important, because as soon as one of us says something like this, like in the book and so forth, talking about mental health, talking about depression, talking about panic attacks, talking about suicidal thoughts, all of these types of things. As soon as you do that and people look at you and think, well, you seem kind of normal, but you obviously did all these things or felt all these things or suffered all these things. Maybe I can get out of that. Maybe I can do something about my current situation. And I think they're really important. I think art has an incredibly, hugely valuable role in society. And that's why it shouldn't be controlled. And that's why it shouldn't be suppressed. And that's why it shouldn't be packaged up nice and tidy and sold for $1. I could very easily get into ranting mode.
The anarchistic artists unite. And let's take over the world.
But then, that would be just as bad, though. That's the battle of heart and mind. Of course.
Yeah, we need balance.
We'd all, as soon as winter came, we'd all starve.
Oh my gosh. Oh, this is so good. Well, Alister, since we've mentioned the book, aka teased our audience quite a few times, why don't you take this opportunity to tell us about the book, and then tell me why you picked a red cover? Because I told Len I was going to ask you this.
Right. Okay. Okay. So I'm in the process as this is being recorded, of packing and shipping a bunch of books out around the world. And it feels really great to be finally at this point. The concept started in January 2017, and I was in the Gobi Desert for the first time out of 7 various trips I went out there. And by the end of 2016, I was really ill. I mean, I was living in the west of Scotland and I was sick. I was really sick in my head. I was crushed with anxiety. I was falling apart, really mentally falling apart. And I'd been holding myself together for kind of 25 to 30 years by this point of constant depression and anxiety, behind a veneer of being a really nice, easygoing, funny guy. And that's the classic dichotomy of the whole situation is externally, I was always a very easygoing, popular kind of person, but I was dying inside, really. So by the end of 2016, my whole relationship with my photography was sour. I was reasonably accomplished. I was recognized as being a competent photographer. I'd done the whole winning a few competitions and that type of thing, and was already running workshops and selling them out, and had a reasonable business. But I didn't feel authentic. I felt like I was living a lie in many ways because the veneer of my photography was not me. It just didn't feel authentic at all. So anyway, we went off into the Gobi Desert in January 2017. And I really had a very conscious period of surrender, just looking at the landscape and just feeling so overwhelmed and so small and so vulnerable. So I just thought, right, I'm not going to try and make photographs here. I'm just going to look and feel. And it was very it was the classic kind of cliched epiphany. So I just started noticing things and thought, right, I'm just going to not think. I'm just going to, if I see something cool, I'm going to point my camera at it. And I did this in the January, and it started to piece together a concept that there was things that somehow the things I was pointing my camera at were a mirror into my mind. That some days they'd be really angular and sharp and jagged and very high contrast. And then on other days, or at different times of the day, they'd be very sensual and sort of sinuous and curvy and gentle and calm and high key. So I realized that this is where the emotional spectrum of aesthetics lies, is that you can have images that feel jagged and dissonant, and then you can have images that feel calming and soothing. So over the next 3 years, 17, 18, 19, I went back to the Gobi another 6 times, sometimes with clients and mostly with clients. And at the end of 2018, I changed profoundly. I walked out a door and walked in through another door. And there was a different person on the other side of that door. And my wife now, my Norwegian wife, Anne, really loved the images that I was making. So I started to piece them together in a kind of spectrum from really dark right through this kind of transitional zone of colliding emotions right through to this other spectrum of very high key images. So I kind of found I had a collection of images that kind of really represented my entire emotional spectrum. And she's been an avid collector of photo books for decades. And I think in the house now we've got 300 or 400 photo books. We've got a lot. And she really wanted me to write a book. She just thought this was a story that should be told, and she felt the images should be out there in print. So, during COVID, I was too busy, trying to survive, for not running workshops. So it kind of got shelved until 21, early 21. And I've got a really good buddy, Bruce Percy, who's another Scottish photographer. And he makes beautiful books, really, really beautiful books. So I asked Bruce, who he used for his books. So I got hooked up with this guy, Darren, who's down in England. And him and I start throwing some ideas around. And he has a very good relationship with the printer in Italy, Trento, because he's done a bunch of books with Bruce. So I put the images together. I wrote all the text, and then got Joe Cornish to write one of the forewords, and then William Neal to write the other foreword. So there's 2 forewords, and then a bunch of essays by me, pretty much telling the story of my life, I guess. So it's kind of very autobiographical. So it's quite a wordy book for a photo book. And yeah, I'm very proud of it. When it finally arrived and we had it in our hand, it was a really, really great feeling, because the book, from a perfectionist point of view, the quality of the book exceeded my expectations, which I was really happy with. But we have thrown everything at this book in terms of, in any shape or form, how we could spend money to make it better. We did it. So the red that you're talking about is the slipcase of the deluxe and the collector's editions. The actual book has black cloth. So the standard edition has black cloth with a recessed photograph on the cover with red end papers. So you do have this black and red, just because black and red is so impactful. It's a really powerful combination. It's a book that just says this is going to be a heavy ride.
Open me. Open me. And stay a while, because it's going to take...
Well, people have been on at me for years and years to do a book. And I didn't want to do a book that was just a collection of pretty photographs of a place or just a collection of random photographs from my travels around the world. It didn't really seem valid or important to me to do that. And I really felt with this that it's more than just a photo book. I do believe that the content has emotional value to anybody who has suffered mental health issues or is looking to try and find a deeper and more emotional relationship with the landscape that will nurture and allow their creativity to blossom. because that is the root of aesthetics, is emotion, as we discussed a little while ago. So yeah, the book is still available. We ended up getting 1,000 printed, just because the economics of producing books is the more you print, the cheaper the book is to produce. We spent an absolute ton of money on this book. And the prices went up, I think, by about 35% just last year because of the war in Ukraine. And there was a global shortage of fine art paper because people who make fine art paper are now making boxes to send aid to Ukraine. So there's all sorts of weird little consequences rippling around the world as well. So yeah, it's been I now know what the word labor of love really means. It is a major, major job. And my wife, my beautiful wife, is so, I mean, every Christmas she wraps the presents and she is a master. You know, she just turns out these little perfect Christmas presents with perfect folds and perfect tape and little ribbons and bows. And basically every book that's getting shipped out is getting that treatment. So it's getting wrapped and then boxed and then bagged. So it's and then there's prints with different editions. So there's a standard edition, and then there's a deluxe edition which comes with a choice of one of 3 prints, and then there's a collector's edition, which is this kind of insane thing, which is the book, 5 prints, another booklet which is hand sewn, which is all about the Gobi and the experience of being in the Gobi. And then there's a USB stick, a little Out of Darkness USB stick, which contains me narrating the book and a 25-minute piece of music that I've composed to go along with the images. So it's a major thing. And the box. So it's been. We could have made it a lot easier for ourselves, but we decided that if I'm going to do it, I might only do it once. I don't know. My wife has said about 12 times over the last week, never again. But
she's done rapping.
Yeah, it's like having kids. After the first, you say never again, and then
and then you have 3 more like me.
Well.
Because I have
congratulations.
4, so
oh my God.
It's a little crazy. I know it's a little crazy over here, but it's okay. I think you said it correctly. This is a labor of love. And I think so much of what we do when we are really passionate about our work, which is what this podcast is about.
Right.
Because the affair isn't with me and Len. The affair is with our art. It's what we're passionate about, right? And so that's the affair, is why.
Oh, I missed all that.
That's news to Len.
Sorry, Len.
Oh, I'm heartbroken.
It's such a play on words. It's all of it.
Well,
it's all of it.
I'm under here. I'm on here under false pretenses.
But I think what you said is correct. This is a labor of love, and so much of what we do is wrapped all up in our emotions and why we do the work that we do. And I think this understanding more about creativity helps us understand more about ourselves and helps us do the creative work that it's all, obviously I'm not good at explaining it because we can't put into words what we're really feeling about our work. It's really quite undescribable, and I'm really excited for your book, Alister, because I feel like it's such an opus magnum of what you have done with your work in your life, just not, from that time that you went to Gobi and then understanding yourself and then really changing who you were and understanding yourself better. And I think this is what we're talking about today. So it's really beautiful. Yeah. So excited for you.
Yeah. And we're excited too. And literally the first ones are being received today, actually. So it's going to be nice to sort of see what other people think and so forth. And I'm a very relaxed guy these days. And even my guitar playing's changed. It's so much has changed in my life. And if someone had said to me 7 years ago, that I'd be where I am today, doing what I'm doing and thinking the things that I'm thinking, and having a relationship with myself that is wholesome and positive and calm, then I would have said no way. You know, I used to have a panic attack if I left the house without a beta blocker in my pocket. You know, so you know, that is just inconceivable to me, or it would have been inconceivable to me. So I think this is where the whole relationship thing comes in, and photography and any other form of creative arts are a catalyst, and we use that catalyst, or we can use that catalyst to affect change. And that's what life is, really. It's growth and maturity, and well, not maturity. I'm a 56-year-old child, but
we don't even know what that is here.
Emotional maturity.
There you go. Yes, 100%.
And I think, yeah, you know, and just trying to be a better person and trying to help other people to be better people, you know, and I think, you know, we might not be curing cancer, but we're saving lives at the same time. You know, it's a profoundly important work, and this is why the whole triviality of some of the relationships that we have with people who don't appreciate what we do or decide to troll you on social media or whatever, it's a shame. You know, I think it's unfortunate when that happens. I'm very grateful that I don't get very much of it, but when I do, I you know, it bugs me, because you just think, well, you're not listening. you don't understand what I'm trying to achieve here. So yeah, it's always an honor to have a chat with other people about these things, because, you know, it's very easy, I think, when you're creative to think you live in a vacuum, you know, and that you're just out there on yourself thinking these things and having these thoughts and trying to work it all out for yourself. And, you know, as Len and I have had many conversations over the last few years, it's always nice to hear somebody else say something that you just think, yeah, that's exactly it. You know, I just think that's such a cool thing.
It's such a beautiful story and metaphor about how art heals. And I really love that way of thinking about it. And it does. And it's something that it takes a long while to unpack. And, you know, Bree was talking about a couple of years to understand our art. And here you're talking about a lifetime to understand yourself and the creative act, a creative life, and the creative art has actually taught you to get to this incredibly calm and beautiful space. And for people that are interested in, you know, early on in their, is it careers? I don't know if that's the right word, but in their journey, or maybe that's the wrong metaphor as well. But early on, it feels like quite a brick wall sometimes. Yeah, with the relationship with your art, this brick wall, and it's worth pushing through. And it's worth keep going, and it's trying to find ways around it and to work with it, or to even stay on this side of it, and to find yourself and to find how art can actually heal you and take you and become such an incredible thing. And I there's so many things that we've talked about today that I really feel in harmony with, which are really beautiful, living a creative life. Using it to heal myself, using it to understand and educate who I am. And, you know, your book is a beautiful metaphor of a signpost along the way. Like, this is a particular spot that you've now passing through, and it's such an exciting one. And I can't wait to get my copy, and I hope it gets in the post soon. And, I'm really looking forward to immersing myself in there, and it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today, Alister.
Yes, well, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very much honoured, and I hope my particular brand of slightly off-centre opinion and thoughts is okay.
I don't think it's as off-center as you imagine, but anyway.
I think it doesn't matter whether it's okay or not, as long as you like it.
That's right. True enough. That's true enough. That just shows how dangerous peer pressure is, eh?
Well, I think it's time. I think our conversation has come to its natural conclusion. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you, Alister, for spending your evening with us. Len, thanks for waking up so early.
I went through the beautiful colors of sunrise as I'm sitting here, and my studio was bathed in oranges for a while, and I was mentally sidetracked in the beautiful light for a moment.
I could hear the rainbow lorikeets outside your window.
Ah, yes. Beautiful things that they are.
Well, thank you, everyone. And we will have, if you're interested in Alister's book, we will put links to all his things, his website, YouTube channel, and where you can get your hands on a copy of that book in the show notes. And until next time, we'll say goodbye. Bye, everyone. Bye, y'all.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Bye, y'all.
Thank you for joining us in our creative affair. If you love the passion we bring to this creative content, please support the podcast by sharing with a friend, subscribing, and leaving us a review. Thanks. If you'd like to learn more about creative photography, visit lenmetcalf.com, where you can find links to Len's photography school, videos, and publications. He would love to invite you to sign up to his newsletter. To find out more about my work, including my photography and mentoring in my Creative Confidence group coaching program, visit creativemindscoach.com. See you next time.